I was forced to raise my siblings while my parents partied. Now they want me to thank them. I was 6 years old the first time I changed a diaper. 7 when I learned how to make macaroni and cheese from the box because no one else would. 8 when I started lying to teachers, saying my mother was sick and my father was working late, because I knew if I told the truth, I'd be ripped away from the only people who actually mattered, my baby brother and sister. By 9, I understood that childhood wasn't a universal experience. It was a privilege, one I would never be granted. While other kids were busy scraping their knees on the pavement or trading Pokemon cards at recess, I was scrubbing vomit out of thrift store sheets, learning how to stretch a single box of cereal to last an entire week, and figuring out how to quiet a screaming infant while doing my math homework. There were no bedtime stories for me, no birthday parties, no lazy Sunday mornings with pancakes and cartoons. There was only survival. My parents, if you could even call them that, were nothing more than ghosts with loud voices and the stench of liquor clinging to their clothes. They existed in the spaces between parties, vanishing for days at a time, only to return with glassy eyes and empty wallets. When they did bother to show up, it was never to tuck us in or ask how school was going. No. Their visits were filled with slurred complaints about how hard their lives were, how ungrateful we were, how lucky we should feel to have a roof over our heads, even if the electricity was cut off again, and the fridge was filled with nothing but expired milk and a single rotting apple. For years I lived in that cycle of waiting, hoping, and inevitably being disappointed. But I adapted. I learned how to function on 4 hours of sleep. I figured out how to steal just enough from the grocery store to keep my siblings fed without getting caught. I became an expert at forging signatures on permission slips, lying to social workers, and making sure my brother and sister never saw how exhausted, how completely shattered I really was. Then, at 18, I finally escaped. It wasn't easy. I left with nothing but a duffel bag and a burning determination to never set foot in that house again. College was out of the question. I had no money, no scholarships, no safety net. So I worked. 2 jobs, sometimes 3, sleeping in a tiny roach-infested apartment while I scraped together every spare dollar to send back to my siblings. I didn't do it out of obligation. I did it because they were mine, not legally, not biologically, but in every way that mattered. They were the only family I had. Years passed. My brother graduated high school with honors. My sister got into college. I built a life, a real one, a job that paid well, a home that was warm and stable, friendships that weren't built on shared trauma. I felt something that had always been foreign to me. Peace. Then, one day, they came back. It started with a phone call, a number I didn't recognize. I should have ignored it. Something in my gut told me to. But old habits die hard, and a part of me still flinched at the idea of missing something important. So I answered, "Hey kid, long time no talk." That voice, gravelly, self-assured, dripping with the kind of forced warmth that only comes from someone who thinks they're owed something. I felt my stomach twist. Who is this? A throaty laugh. Come on, don't be like that. It's your mother. Silence. A deafening, ringing silence. Then, as if sensing my hesitation, she kept talking, filling the void with nonsense. Your dad and I were just talking about you the other day. We're so proud of you. You really turned out great, didn't you? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. You know, she continued, her voice taking on that insufferable, self-congratulatory tone. We really did you a favor. All that responsibility we gave you, that made you who you are today. If we hadn't let you take care of your brother and sister, do you really think you'd be as strong as you are now? I let out a slow breath, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. Are you serious? Oh, don't be so dramatic, she scoffed. Most people don't learn those skills until they're adults. You had a head start. You should be thanking us. Thanking them. Thanking them. For what? For the nights I spent crying into a pillow, terrified that I wouldn't be able to feed my siblings the next day? For the way my hands used to shake when I had to count out change at the grocery store knowing it wasn't enough? For the years I lost, the childhood I never had? I realized, in that moment, that they weren't just calling to reconnect. They were calling because they wanted something. Money. A place to stay. A handout from the child they had abandoned. And worse, they thought they deserved it. That was when I knew. They weren't sorry. They never would be. So I made a decision. I inhaled slowly, allowing myself to savor the moment. You know what? I said, my voice eerily calm. You're right. I do owe you something. There was a beat of silence. Then my mother chuckled. See? I knew you'd come around. I smiled, a slow, cold curve of my lips. I owe you the same thing you gave me. Confusion flickered in her voice. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, enunciating each word with sharp precision, that from this moment on, you no longer exist to me, just like I never existed to you. Then, before she could sputter out another excuse, another demand, another pathetic attempt at rewriting history, I hung up, and I finally felt free. Hanging up should have been the end of it. It should have been enough. But people like them, parasites who suck the life out of others and still demand gratitude, don't give up so easily. I learned that lesson long ago. The past doesn't stay buried just because you want it to. It claws its way back to the surface, dragging dirt and rot with it, until you're forced to face it head on. The next morning, the texts started. At first they were casual. "Hey kid, let's talk." Then they turned passive-aggressive. "Ignoring your own mother? That's cold." By noon they were outright hostile. "You think you're better than us? Just because you got lucky?" Lucky. That word made me laugh. A hollow, bitter sound that didn't even feel like it belonged to me. If I had been lucky, I wouldn't have spent my childhood rationing out food so my siblings wouldn't go to bed hungry. If I had been lucky, I wouldn't have learned how to quiet a baby with a lullaby while my stomach twisted with hunger. If I had been lucky, my parents wouldn't have thrown me into the fire and called it a favor. But of course they wouldn't see it that way. Because to them, I wasn't a person. I was a resource, a never-empty well they thought they could keep drawing from. And now that I had cut them off, they were panicking. By evening, the messages stopped. But the silence didn't bring relief. It only made me uneasy. I knew them too well. When words didn't work, they resorted to other methods. I wasn't wrong. At exactly 8:42 p.m., there was a knock at my door. It wasn't a hesitant knock. It wasn't the kind of polite tap you'd expect from a neighbor borrowing sugar. No, this was deliberate. Loud. A demand, not a request. I already knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. And yet, when I saw my mother standing there, her arms crossed, her lips curled into an expression of forced patience, I still felt my stomach drop. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stood there, staring at the woman who had shaped my life through absence more than presence. She didn't look like someone who had suffered. No sunken cheeks, no hollowed-out eyes. Her clothes were clean, her hair dyed a shade of brown that was too even to be natural. She wasn't starving, she wasn't desperate, she was just entitled. The knock came again, sharper this time. "I know you're in there," she called, her voice muffled through the door. "Come on, don't be childish." Childish. The irony of that nearly made me laugh. I let the silence stretch between us. A full minute passed, then another. Finally, I heard a frustrated sigh. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. Then, louder. "Fine. If you're going to be difficult, I'll just wait out here." I should have ignored her. I should have turned off the lights, pretended I wasn't home, and let her sit there until she got bored and left. But something inside me, something old and wounded and still aching, wanted to see this through. So I opened the door. The moment she saw me, her expression changed. She tried to soften it, tried to paint herself as a mother who had just come for a heartfelt reunion. But I knew better. The flicker of irritation in her eyes, the way her lips pressed too tightly together. It was all a mask, and I had seen her without it too many times to be fooled. I didn't say anything, just stood there waiting. She let out a breathy laugh. "You really weren't going to open the door, huh?" Still, I said nothing. She shifted her weight, glancing around as if expecting a different reaction. When none came, she huffed and crossed her arms. "Well, aren't you going to invite me in?" "No." That single word hit her harder than I expected. Her eyebrows shot up, and I saw something that almost looked like uncertainty, but it was gone just as quickly, replaced by something sharper. "Is that any way to treat your mother?" she asked, tilting her head. Something inside me snapped. I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed over my chest. "My mother," I repeated, letting the words roll off my tongue as if they were foreign. "I think you're confused." Her eyes narrowed. "Oh, don't start with that." "No," I cut in, my voice cold. "You don't get to say anything. You don't get to show up here after years of nothing and act like you deserve something from me." Her jaw tightened. "We raised you. I raised me. I raised them," I snapped, my voice rising. "You partied. You disappeared for days. You spent rent money on booze while I was figuring out how to keep the lights on. So don't stand there and pretend you did me some kind of favor." She rolled her eyes, exhaling sharply. "Oh, you always do this, acting like you had it so bad." I laughed, the sound sharp and humorless. "Had it so bad?" I repeated. "Do you even remember what it was like?" "Because I do. I remember every single second." I took a step forward, watching her take an instinctive step back. "I remember carrying my baby brother to school, because you were too hungover to drive. I remember stealing food from gas stations because we didn't have anything to eat. I remember lying awake at night, terrified that you wouldn't come home, and being just as terrified when you did." Her expression faltered. "But I wasn't done. You think you made me strong? That I should thank you for forcing me to grow up before I even had a chance to be a kid?" I let out a breath, steadying myself. "All you did was take from me. And now, after all this time, you have the nerve to show up and act like I owe you something?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked uncertain, but that uncertainty didn't last. It never did. She squared her shoulders, her lips curling into something ugly. "You're being dramatic," she spat, "acting like you're the only person in the world who's ever struggled. We did what we had to do. And now that you've made it, you think you're too good for us?" I stared at her, and in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't capable of regret. She wasn't capable of seeing the truth. I could scream at her until my voice was raw. I could throw every single memory in her face, list every time she had abandoned me, every time she had failed. But it wouldn't matter, because she didn't want to understand. She just wanted to take. I let out a slow breath, letting the anger drain from me. "You're right about one thing," I said finally. "I did make it." Her lips curled. So? "So," I said, my voice steady. "I don't need you. And I never will." Before she could respond, I stepped back and shut the door in her face. I didn't wait to hear her reaction. I didn't care. I had nothing left to say. The knock didn't come again. No angry pounding, no desperate pleas. Just silence. A silence that should have been satisfying. But it wasn't. I stood there, hands still resting against the door, heart pounding in my ears. My mother was on the other side, close enough that I could still feel the weight of her presence, even through the thick barrier of wood and steel. For a long time I didn't move. Then, slowly, I forced myself to step away, to put distance between myself and the poison that had seeped back into my life like a slow, creeping rot. I told myself it was over, that she would leave, just like she always had, that she would slink away into the night, tail between her legs, and that I could go back to the life I had built, untouched, undisturbed. But I knew better. People like her didn't just disappear. They festered. The next morning it started again. This time, it wasn't just her. It was my father. The moment I saw his name flash across my phone screen, I felt my stomach twist. It had been years since I last heard his voice. The last time we spoke, I was barely 17, standing in the middle of our dark, freezing apartment, listening to him slur his way through an excuse about how he forgot to pay the heating bill. I remembered the way my fingers had been numb, how my baby sister had been curled against my side, her small body shivering beneath a too thin blanket. Now, years later, his name glowed on my screen like a malignant tumor. I almost didn't answer. But I did, because despite everything, there was still a small, broken part of me that wanted to hear something. Some acknowledgement, some whisper of regret. I should have known better. The moment I answered, his voice came through smooth as ever. "Hey, kiddo." Kiddo, like nothing had ever happened. Like he had been there. Like we weren't strangers connected by blood and nothing else. I swallowed back the immediate disgust curling in my throat. "What do you want?" He laughed. "Straight to the point, huh? Just like your old man." I said nothing. He let out a breath, as if I was the one testing his patience. "Look, your mother told me what happened last night. She said you were less than welcoming." "Less than welcoming?" I repeated, voice dangerously flat. "She was trying to reach out," he said, as if that alone should be enough. As if the years of neglect and abandonment could be wiped clean by a single, unannounced visit. "She just wanted to talk." I exhaled slowly, pressing my fingers to my temple. "You really expect me to believe that?" He sighed, the sound thick with practiced disappointment. "Look, I know things weren't perfect back then. We were young. We made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I cut in sharply. "A mistake is forgetting a parent-teacher conference. A mistake is missing a few birthdays. What you did, that wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. Over and over again." His voice hardened. "You think life was easy for us?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Are you serious right now? You don't know what it was like," he pressed. "We had you young. We didn't have money. We did the best we could." "The best you could?" I repeated, my voice sharp enough to cut. "You left me to raise 2 kids when I was barely out of kindergarten. You blew through paychecks at the lounge while I was digging through couch cushions to buy formula. You chose partying over parenting every single time." "Don't be so dramatic," he snapped. "We kept a roof over your head, didn't we?" I clenched my jaw, forcing the anger down. I knew his game. I had seen him play it before. The denial, the deflection, the rewriting of history until the truth was so distorted it barely resembled reality. I wouldn't let him do it again. "I'm done with this conversation," I said flatly. But before I could hang up, his voice sharpened. "You think you're better than us now, huh? Just because you got out?" Got out. Like I had escaped a prison sentence. Maybe, in a way, I had. "I am better than you," I said, my voice calm, steady, "because I would rather die than become anything like you." And with that, I ended the call. The war they weren't prepared for. I should have known they wouldn't stop. For them, this wasn't just about reconnecting. It wasn't about family, or love, or even guilt. It was about control. They had spent years keeping me in my place, making sure I knew exactly what I was. A tool. A convenient, disposable thing that existed to absorb the consequences of their actions. And now, I wasn't playing along. So they escalated. The next week was a storm of manipulation disguised as concern. Calls from unknown numbers. Texts from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all echoing the same rehearsed lines. "You need to forgive them. They were doing their best. Family is family." I ignored them all. But then, they did something I wasn't prepared for. They went to my siblings. It was a casual conversation, I'm sure. A concerned one. My mother, with her crocodile tears, lamenting how cruel I was being. My father, playing the wounded victim, shaking his head and sighing about how he just wanted to talk. And it worked, because a few days later my brother called. Unlike my parents, his voice wasn't smooth. It was hesitant, uneasy. "Hey, can we talk?" I closed my eyes. "They got to you, didn't they?" A pause. Then, I don't know, they sounded different. I nearly laughed. Of course they did. They were masters of deception. "Please don't do this," I said, my voice softer now. "You know who they are." "I know," he said quickly. "I do, but..." He exhaled. "Maybe they've changed." I clenched my jaw, swallowing back the surge of frustration. He was smart, he was strong, but he had always wanted to believe in the best of people, even in people who had never given him a reason to. "They haven't," I said, my voice unwavering. Another pause. Then, quieter. "I just don't want to regret not giving them a chance." I felt something inside me crack, because I knew that feeling. I had lived it. The desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. That the people who hurt you might wake up one day and suddenly become the parents you had always needed them to be. But it was a lie. A cruel, insidious lie that only ever led to more pain. "They don't deserve a chance," I said. My brother sighed. I don't know." And I realized with a dull ache in my chest that no matter how much I had done for them, no matter how many nights I had stayed up rocking them to sleep, how many meals I had put on the table with money I didn't have, some part of them would always see our parents as something worth saving. I couldn't be angry at him for that, but I also couldn't let it destroy me. So I said, "If you want to talk to them, I won't stop you. But don't expect me to be there when they hurt you again." He didn't respond right away. Then softly, "I'll call you later." And just like that, the chains I had spent years breaking began to tighten around my throat again. I knew it was over before my brother ever called me back. The silence was my answer. Days passed, then a week, then 2. The messages stopped. The unknown calls vanished. The forced concern from distant relatives evaporated. My parents had done what they always did, slithered away when they realized they couldn't sink their teeth in deep enough to drain me. I had won. But victory wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. Because despite everything, a part of me still ached. Not for them. Not for the ghosts who called themselves my parents. But for the ones I had fought so hard to protect. The ones who, in the end, still wanted to believe in a lie. Then, one night, my phone rang. I didn't need to check the caller ID. I knew who it was. I answered. My brother's voice was quiet. "Hey." I exhaled slowly, pressing the phone tighter against my ear. "Hey." There was a long pause, and then finally, "You were right." 3 words. 3 words, heavy with exhaustion, regret, and something else. Something raw and broken. I closed my eyes. "What happened?" He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Same thing that always happens." I didn't need him to explain. I could picture it perfectly. The cycle, repeating itself like a curse. The apologies, the crocodile tears, the promises of change. And then, when they didn't get what they wanted, the masks slipping, the anger, the manipulation, the venom beneath the surface. "How bad was it?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "Bad enough." I swallowed down the fury curling in my chest. For years I had been their shield. I had taken the blows, both the physical and the invisible, so my siblings wouldn't have to. But I wasn't there this time, and because of that, my brother had been forced to see them for what they really were. I wanted to tell him I was sorry, but I wasn't. He needed to see it. Maybe it was cruel, but I had learned long ago that some people didn't walk away until they had been burned enough times to finally feel the heat. "Are you done with them?" I asked. Another pause. Then, quietly, "Yeah." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Good." A shaky breath. "I should have listened to you." "You had to see it for yourself," I said simply. "I get it." He sighed. "I don't know how to do this." "You don't have to," I said, "not alone." And I meant it. For years I had held everything together on my own. I had carried the weight of an entire household on my back. I had broken my bones to build a foundation strong enough for them to stand on. And even when I left, I had still been fighting. Still been bracing myself for the moment they would come back and try to take everything I had built. But now, I wasn't fighting alone. It wasn't just my battle anymore. "I'm proud of you," I said, and I was. He let out a shaky laugh. "For what?" "For choosing yourself." Another pause. Then, "Are we going to be okay?" I thought about everything we had survived. The nights spent huddled together. The whispered promises that one day things would be better. I thought about the sacrifices, the losses, the scars that would never truly fade. And then, I thought about the future. The one we would build, free from the weight of our parents' sins.